These are hard and challenging times. Late at night, when I pad around my house, doom scrolling on my phone to see what new catastrophe has unfolded, I feel that despair and despondency in my heart pulling me down and down and down. I feel despondent because due to the criminally inept mismanagement of this disease, there have been more than 200,000 American deaths, 4 times the American death toll in Vietnam. I feel despondent when I realize that the courts are being packed with ideologues who will serve on the bench for generations. And I feel despondent when I realize we may or may not have generations as the West is burning and the effects of climate change become more and more real every day. I feel despondent when I realize phrases like, I am an anti-fascist or Black Lives Matter, things that should be obviously true, become divisive statements in our country. I feel despondent when wearing a face mask, a simple, obvious public health good, becomes a marker of political and cultural identity to pull us apart. I feel despondent when I realize that the best realistic case scenario for this election is that it's battled out in the courts, and it very well might be battled out on the streets. I feel that despondency pulling me down, and I remember again and again the teaching from the Yerushalmi, from the Talmud Yerushalmi. Kol zman she'adam chai, yesh lo tikva, met avda tikvato. As long as a person is alive, he has hope. But when he gives up hope, he dies. So as long as I am alive, I must find ways to hope. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, one of the most important of the Hasidic masters, teaches Ein chet ela yeush. There is no sin other than despair. The only sin, the essential sin, he teaches, is thinking that you know what the future holds, you know it's going to be terrible, and you know there's nothing you can do to change it. No, he says, the essential religious posture is a posture of hope. Not an irresponsible hope, a foolish hope, like thinking that COVID will just magically go away on its own, but a hope with integrity. F. Scott Fitzgerald famously said that the mark of intelligence is the ability to hold 2 contradictory ideas in your mind at the same time and retain the ability to operate. He went on to say, one should, for example, be able to see that things are hopeless and yet be determined to make them otherwise. This is what Rabbi Nachman means when he teaches, Im atam ma'amin sheyecholim lekalkel, ta'amin sheyecholim letaken. If you believe it can be destroyed, believe it can be repaired. Hope is an embrace of the unknown and the unknowable, an alternative to the certainty of the optimists and the pessimists. The optimists want to say, everything's going to be great, you don't need to do a thing. And the pessimists want to say, everything's going to be terrible and you can't do a thing. Both of them excuse us from acting. But hope is the belief that what we do matters, even though how and when it might matter and to who it might matter is not just unknown, but unknowable. Hope is not a substitute for action. It is the basis for action. Hope lives in the gap between what is and what might yet be, because in that spaciousness is where we have room to act. Our actions are like arrows shot into the future towards targets that we can't see. When I say I am a person of faith, it is not because I have the faith that a God in the sky is going to reach down and fix everything that is wrong in my heart, in my community, or in my family. It's because I have faith that I and you and all of us together, with God's help, can fire those arrows of action into the future, and some of them will find their mark. Hope that things can be better is inextricably tied to the responsibility to act, to make things better. Hope is not a feeling. It's a practice. It's an orientation towards the world. It's a discipline. It is, to be honest, a discipline I find it harder and harder to maintain. I find it harder to maintain that discipline when I scan the news to see if there is a mob of white robes and red hats gathering in my town, in my community, in my country to make America great again. I find it hard to maintain that discipline of hope, and so I turn to the heroes of my traditions to inspire me in hope. I turn to the story of Nachshon ben Aminadav, who our rabbis teach was one of the Israelites who stood at the edge of the sea when we were liberated from Egypt. And with the sea in front of him and the Egyptian army behind him, he knew he had no reason to hope. He was quite literally between a rock and a hard place. And with no reason to believe, he walked into the water. He walked into water up to his ankles, up to his knees. He walked into water up to his middle, up to his chest. And it wasn't until the water came to his nose, the rabbis teach, that the waters split and the thousands of Israelites poured across that sea to safety on the other side. Or I look to our more recent past, more recent Nachshonim, like John Lewis of blessed memory. John Lewis was one of the original Freedom Riders, and in 1961, after a bus full of Freedom Riders had been firebombed, he got back on the bus with the other Freedom Riders, and as the bus pulled into Montgomery, Alabama, he put himself in the front of the line of people on the bus and looked out the window to see a mob of angry white people ready, willing, and able to kill him and everyone else on the bus. He stood there on the front of the bus and got off with incredible courage, with incredible determination, with incredible hope. I look now out of my despair, and I look for a hero like Nachshon or Lewis who will lead us out of this national nightmare. I'm waiting for a hero to emerge, for Robert Mueller or Rod Rosenstein or Adam Schiff or Christine Blasey Ford to end what we're going through. They've done what they could, but they can't end this. Thinking that they can is buying in to the false and damaging myth of American individualism. We don't need one hero who will end this. We need an army of heroes. And we know what it is to mobilize an army of heroes. In December 1955, the Montgomery bus boycott started. We know famously of Rosa Parks, who refused to give her seat up. But she didn't do this alone. She couldn't possibly have done this alone. When Parks and Martin Luther King and the other leaders organized the bus boycott, they knew they needed a way for people to get to their jobs, for people to get around. And the buses were the main way that the poor folks of Montgomery, Alabama, the black folks of Montgomery, Alabama got around. And so they reached out to the cabbies, and the cabbies arranged and agreed to charge only 10 cents, which is what the bus fare was, to take people under the new emergency conditions. But the police said they would arrest any cabbie who charged less than the customary 45-cent fare, so the cabbies backed out. They then put out a call for private citizens who had cars to volunteer to shuttle people around town. And the first night that they put out the call for volunteers, 150 people volunteered their private cars to drive people around. And there weren't so many car owners in Montgomery, Alabama, certainly not so many African-American car owners in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955. But 150 stepped up, which is incredible, until you realize they needed to provide upwards of 20,000 rides a day every single day. But they started with 150 cars and they inched up and inched up. It took a month to get to 350 cars of people who were sympathetic to this cause. There's no memorial to those hundreds of drivers, to those people who volunteered their time and energy and vehicles to those people on the ground who made the Montgomery bus boycott happen and changed the shape of American history. But it didn't happen. It couldn't happen with just Rosa Parks or just Martin Luther King or just John Lewis, great though they were. It took an army of heroes on the ground to make it happen. When I turn back to the moment we're in now, I can see I've done what I can. I've gone to rallies, I've given speeches, I've written letters, and I've written checks, and yet the country is not yet where I hope it will be. The truth is, of course it's not there. Of course my efforts alone couldn't change that. The challenges we are facing and the challenges in front of us require all of us. The Torah teaches emet me'eretz titzmach. Truth sprouts from the ground, and the ground is us. Thousands upon thousands, millions upon millions of us, regular Americans who want to live in a good and decent country that is fair and just for everyone who lives here. Americans who want a government that is responsive to the will of people, not to corporations. Americans who want to leave air and water and food and land to live on to future generations. This moment requires all of us, like the hundreds upon hundreds of anonymous drivers of Montgomery, Alabama. This moment requires all of us to vote and protest and write and donate. And if it comes to it, and if this election is tampered with, and if the results of this election are not respected, it will require all of us to turn out into the streets in a general strike, if that's what is needed. Truth comes from the ground. Truth comes from the people on the ground, and so does hope. The truth is, I don't feel that hopeful, and the truth is, that doesn't matter one bit. Somewhat to my surprise, later in life, I've become a runner. And some mornings I wake up fired up and excited to put on my sneakers and go and run. And some mornings I don't. And it doesn't matter, because running is a discipline, not a feeling. Feelings flow from actions, not the other way around. And so the fact that I don't feel hopeful, the fact that I feel despondent, doesn't matter. The discipline of running brings forth the desire to be strong, and the discipline of acting brings forth hope. The truth waiting to spring from the ground is that we on the ground are the source of hope. We on the ground are the hope we need. From the Haftorah this morning, the prophet Isaiah offers this blessing, which I offer to all of us. Uvanu mimcha charvot olam, mosde dor vador tekomem, v'kra lacha godel peretz, mesovev netivot lashevet. Some from your midst will rebuild ancient ruins. Some will restore foundations laid long ago. And you shall be called repairers of fallen walls, restorers of pathways to peace. May we, all of us together, be among those who restore the foundations of the best of what America is, who rebuild those pathways to peace for us and for the generations to follow. May 5781 be a year of courage, a year of peace, and a year of the discipline and practices of hope. Gemar Chatima Tova.